First challenge of the work group, I figured out how to record a meeting.
What did you do to change your guest to host?
I had to leave the meeting and then sign into Zoom and then come back to the meeting. It would not sign in while I was in a meeting. So that's always fun. Cool. Well, welcome all to the first meeting of our area of focus work group. We have a rudimentary kind of a doc that I made for agendas and notes and all that fun stuff. The formatting is not set in stone. If you have better ideas, by all means, change it up. Our main objectives are going to be to coalesce SaaS and self-managed into, one group in Zendesk, because as much as we love to talk about how much we're the same team, as long as Zendesk keeps saying we're not, that's kind of going to be how it's always kind of viewed. It also overcomplicates a lot of our routing and a lot of our stuff when we're basically like, no, pretend these two things aren't the same thing. Our other thing is Tom A. back 6 months ago had talked to me, and we had this great idea for areas of focus, which would allow us to have people more specialized on tickets, get faster replies. The biggest problem was we couldn't figure out how to start tackling this because we didn't have sufficient views. We didn't have the bandwidth. Well, Support Ops is a team now, and I have 2 free views. Ooh. So we actually do have the bandwidth and time to do this. So I would like to get both of these things accomplished so that we can get routing and all that fun stuff kind of fixed up. Sauce as in like the link where we talked about this. I will find it, I promise. It's somewhere buried in my Gmail box.
She's making fun of the way you say sass.
Oh, sass. How do you say it?
I say sass. You say sauce?
Oh, I say
tomato,
sauce.
tomato,
Yeah.
sauce.
Look,
tomato sass and tomato
alone.
sauce.
Yeah, I don't know why I say it that way. I just always have. I think it's because the first person who ever said that word to me said it sass. So from that point forward, that's all it's ever been. Cool. But one of the big things I'm not really sure on how to tackle is the barrier to getting self-managed and SaaS, sauce, whatever, coalesced. And the reason I say that is I was self-managed senior, and then I was a support manager with most of my focus being in self-managed. All the stuff I've learned about self-managed happened in ops as a manager, mainly from talking to Cynthia and Lyle as I tried to build things for them. So I have a huge just gap of my knowledge of what exactly is the overlap. Another kind of barrier that we might see that's like technical ability, it might be opinion or feelings. The end goal of all of this should be to coalesce it so that we're all working the same tickets. We can all work together. We don't feel like we're 2 separate teams. We don't have to answer questions that are hard to answer, like what's the SaaS coverage for next week? It should be whatever the support coverage is. That's kind of our like ultimate goal is we don't have to keep playing this separation game. So kind of gonna open it up so y'all can start talking and letting me know what kind of things you think are some barriers. Maybe I haven't mentioned some.
This is on the doc. From my perspective, like one of the big differences is workflows. Like questions like where do I get logs? It like ask the customer versus go into Kibana. Like privileged access versus no access whatsoever, and asking for screenshots and things like that. Like that's another big difference. So one of the things that I hope we can do is figure out some ways that we can coalesce even just the workflows, where we can make SM a little bit closer to self-managed. So I opened up an issue a few weeks ago about using Gitpod to do some of that. Like we already have the support uploader. If we turn off attachments, then that means that we can make things a little bit more similar. So that's a direction that I think we can coalesce a little bit, but some of the barriers, I think, are just psychological.
There's a few kind of very, sorry, excuse me, half-formed thoughts I've got, and some considerations of some things that we need to just be mindful of. For example, the impact on what does this do for our various on-call rotations. So they're currently focused on SaaS or for CMOC and self-managed for customer emergencies. So we just need to be mindful of that as we coalesce what the end goal is. What does that mean for on-call rotations as well? And on what you were saying, Lyle, about for example, the logs and the different way we do them, I keep having this thought about like a Rosetta Stone. And it's what I've talked about with my people who are doing a blended onboarding approach, kind of going, right, we need logs. This is how you do it in a self-hosted paradigm, and this is how you do it if it's a .com customer. And just kind of having that Rosetta Stone translation for, it's the same concept, but there's two different techniques to achieve it. Half-formed thoughts.
Cool. So yeah, the on-call one, I have an idea on that one in long sense, because me and Lyle have been, just slamming our heads against the wall. Figuring out rotations and how to make sure they don't overlap is a huge struggle because of the current way we do things. I feel like the perk of coalescing is because we don't have to separate that, we can kind of get the rotations where every rotation has the same number of people on it, so we can ensure there is not overlap, there is not problems. But just kind of like a thought of that, of if they're coalesced, then we can have self-managed doing CMOC. We can also have, the sauce people also helping in like FRT and SLA. So the perk of that is by no longer having to separate those rotations, we can actually make them kind of uniform in size to make sure that nobody's FRT and on call in the same week, because we're trying rotations with very different sizes of people. Cool. Cynthia, you want to voice what you typed in the doc?
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, there's going to be a transition as well as an end goal, right? And I do think it's important for everyone who either, like, I think maybe every individual or manager needs to speak to every individual, but basically if someone doesn't already have experience working in one or the other, they would need to basically take at least a portion of the onboarding for the other side, so to speak, right? So if you're someone who is completely SaaS focused, then maybe you should do the self-managed specific part of the onboarding and vice versa. And I do think it's important to understand the context around things like even where do you get logs and what do you have to keep in mind that is kind of different. So actually Ronnie kind of requested this for me, but I had written tried to write kind of like the TLDR version of what you need to know specifically for .com. That's part of the .com onboarding, but also I think just a really good reference for that. Don't have one for self-managed, but I think what we could, I mean, there's different ways we could do this. Either we could write a separate one for self-managed, or we could kind of put all this information in one page, but then kind of call out, okay, this is how it works in .com and this is how it would work in self-managed. So for, like, as Jane said, or, like if you're looking for logs, this is how you do it in .com, this is how you do it in self-managed. When you're looking at customer data, this is kind of what to keep in mind for .com, what to keep in mind for self-managed. So I mean, we could either kind of turn that page around, or we could write a separate self-managed one. I do think that that's going to be part of what's going to be needed. And then I had to look at the onboarding workflow again, but I know that at some point they were not both required.
Yeah, there's two different learning pathways, and you choose one or other. Well, your manager chooses one or other with you.
I think the whole goal that we want to get to has three angles. One, how we onboard new people to be hybrid. Two, how we make people who work in .com work with self-managed. I mean, how we make them feel comfortable there. And then how we do the other side, which is how we make self-managed comfortable with .com. The way that I have been approaching at least the first is I like new people to work with .com first, because in my mind, I want people to understand the tool first. So this is the tool, use it, get familiar with it, get familiar with the features of the tool. When they jump to self-manage, what I'm trying to do is something that Greg has been helping me with, is training them not into this is how you install in Docker, this is how you install in from source or Omnibus. No, it is more as in the difference. Like, okay, in logging, this is how you do it here. Maybe you will not have it, so take it from here, or do this, or do that. So I believe those are the three challenges, but I believe it will be easier as a first angle to work how to get .com people into self-managed, because I think the other way around will be more confusing, because at least I see the .com as the general and the self-managed as the specific. And I think it will be easier to work with .com people to get into self-managed.
Conceptually, I agree, but SaaS staffing has been the bigger challenge. And so there's some need to make sure that we're covering our SaaS tickets like with enough people. So yeah, if we're starting from zero, totally, I definitely agree. But we have to operate in the environment we have. Do you have a way to help with that?
My honest suggestion, since SaaS staffing has been a constant problem, is honestly to go kind of in the reverse. I think we should be trying to focus on getting self-managed to learn how to work with SaaS stuff. I think it'll only strengthen their self-managed abilities to know how GitLab itself works, how a production GitLab actually looks and feels, because that's what GitLab.com is. It's a production GitLab. I can tell you from my experience as a senior, when I was self-managed focused, my greatest weakness, and Lau can attest this, was GitLab. I could do almost anything until it was like a question about merge trains. And then I'm like, I have no idea. I have no context on merge trains. So I do think teaching self-managed to learn how to work with GitLab.com, how to work those tickets, is only going to strengthen them, so that when a self-managed customer's like, I'm having trouble with merge trains, they're not going to freeze up and hope Cynthia can help them. They're going to instead go, oh wait, I know all about this because I've had to already work with them. But
I think,
I was going to say, like, on that front though, would self-managed need admin access like the SaaS team currently has?
I know James is working on at least evaluating whether auditor role is enough. I know that a lot of the self-managed folks already do have an admin account from the .com emergency rollout. So it kind of, it's kind of interesting, because we used to keep saying like, oh, we shouldn't be giving everyone in support an admin account, but we kind of are now, right? Like we're rolling it out slowly, so not everyone does, but you know, in a couple months, more than half of the self-managed team is going to have it. So do they have access already? Probably. Should they stay having admin access? Maybe not. So that's what James is looking at with auditor role and how much that's going to be limiting. But I think maybe we need to go back to Lyle's question of, at least that is in the doc, about how do we want to scope this? Because what's interesting is that despite the fact that you set up these 2 objectives, and there are only 2 objectives, obviously from the discussion that we've had, there's so much stuff kind of related to it, and like, you know, there's all these tangents that we could go into, and maybe we should start back with your objectives and say, okay, if we want to implement this in Zendesk today, we want to change the views so that instead of by product, they are by problem type. What do we then need to get there? And it might be all of these things that we've talked about, but I wonder if we can focus on that first, and then kind of maybe make a list of, you know, other things that we might need to support that work and kind of what that would look like.
Yeah, I fully agree. I know the objectives are slightly vague, and that's because I'm like, there's going to be a ton of spider things that just come out from this that I feel like we were going to surface. Part of the reason I put Tom A's areas of focus is I believe that might be the key to doing this. Like Cynthia just said, sorting them by problem type. That's kind of what the areas of focus is about, is sorting them about what's the ticket about. We have to do that now because the ticket's either about SaaS or self-managed. I think we just need to get more granular with it, get a little more specific, where it's like, this is a geo ticket. It should go to people with geo knowledge or people in the geo group or whatever it is, however we want to implement this. I think to get them coalesced in Zendesk, that's kind of what we need to do, is like Cynthia said, okay, figure out how are we going to separate the tickets by problem type, by product stage, et cetera. And that'll help us get it so that it's not, this is a SaaS ticket, this is a self-managed ticket, this is a geo ticket, this is a merge train ticket, or however granular we want to get with that. Obviously, iteration is important, so I'd say start with big areas and work our way down to smaller ones.
Yeah, I that's kind of the direction I would think is, let's start with the areas of focus, break up what we think those are, identify, and Cynthia talked about, you know, taking a training and here's what you do if it's self-managed, here's what you do if it's .com, and you apply those to the areas of focus. And so we start out and say, okay, well, here's what we think the areas of focus are, and I want to kind of stay away from what the implementation in Zendesk is. Maybe there's some specific things we need to consider to make sure it's implementable. But if you want to organize, think about organizing by areas of focus, then you can break out within areas of focus what are the SaaS and what are the self-managed specifics, if you will, right? Associate onboarding to those types of things. But as you're identifying the areas of focus, and you say, okay, well, what's missing, right? What do we have? What tickets do we have from .com that don't fit these areas of focus? What tickets do we have from self-managed that don't fit these areas of focus? And that gets to more of I would hope, an exception or a limited number. So you're attacking the bigger area or the bigger coverage by identifying the areas of focus. And then the things that you've all talked about to this point kind of flow from that grouping, right? And if it's a complete set, and area of focus covers everything you run into in SaaS and everything you run into self-managed, then great. Then, you know, how would we organize our workflows around that? How would we adjust Zendesk? How would we adjust our onboarding? How would we, you know, or just general education from people that are already onboarded, right? So I think kind of flipping it on its side and getting to a point where everybody agrees these are the high level areas of focus, and it covers 90% of any ticket we ever get, whatever that percentage might be.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach this. I see Cynthia typing problem types. My biggest challenge to that is I don't think the problem types we currently use on tickets are going to work for this. And I say that because not only are they vague, but sometimes they don't fit. Especially since there's some that kind of match, like performance on the sauce side matches. There's also the same problem type in self-managed, but those are almost entirely different things, topics entirely. Because performance on .com tends to be, like GitLab availability, GitLab could be down, stuff like that. Whereas performance on a self-managed setup is just a huge headache.
Well, I do think that if we are, I mean, I think for, like Tom says, there could be exceptions for certain things, right? So say authorization and authentication is pretty similar regardless of, right, of the like permission issues, it's the same, right? Like, and CI runners, all of those are very similar. So we could say like, okay, there are, I mean, obviously, again, we could go all day, investigating exactly the specific technical implementations and how to split it out. But for certain ones like performance, we could say, okay, you're going to have a view that is performance self-managed specifically, especially because that speaks a lot to almost what we've been calling solution support, right? Is someone who is much more familiar with how GitLab interacts with the hardware and the infrastructure that different customers are on, right? And then you would have one that is specifically around performance on GitLab.com, especially if you have someone on CMOC who might be paying a bit more attention to that view that week, whatever, right? So, but I think all the other problem types, even Tom A did say that they need to be reviewed and revised. And so I think that this would partially be an opportunity to help kind of figure out what might need to change around problem types if we do want to do it by area of focus. But I like you say, I think we can just have exceptions, and there's going to be certain problem types that are .com only, right? Things like the CI minutes purchase that we were just talking about today, right? Even if you make a separate view for that, you're never going to get self-managed tickets in there. And maybe, we're not even going to be showing that problem type if someone says they're on self-managed.
Jason, good question. Is there a way in Zendesk that we can create different forms for people to create their tickets, but the ticket gets sent to the same view? Because that way we can ask for the self-managed specific and then the .com specific. Like for the customer, they will have a difference, but for us, we will not have one.
Well, that's I think, I mean, Jason can talk to this a bit more if he wants, because he's more familiar with Zendesk. But so right now our views are separated by product, at least the GitLab support one. So ignoring LNR for the time being, right? So it's separated by .com and self-managed. But what you could do is say, no, we're going to have a view for each problem type. So the view will just pull it based on the problem type. So you have a view for authentication and authorization.
No, but what I was thinking is, that's what I'm clear. But what I'm thinking is, can the form be different and then something happens here, so the ticket will show in this view, regardless of the
what Cynthia is saying here is like the forms and the views are mutually exclusive.
Okay.
So the forms can lead into views or they can not lead into views. That's all based on the views criteria. We can actually make every view not care about the form at all, which to a degree is what we would end up kind of doing. It sounds like obviously if they say security, it's still going to go to the security view, and the easiest way to do that is the form is security. But yeah, that's actually relatively simple to do. Several of our views, like needs org tickets, go to that view, and it does not care about the form, other than it's not security, AR, professional services, or LNR. It says, no, they don't have an org. That's why they belong here. I call it needs org, but it's needs org in triage. We've just never really used it as triage ever. But I think this is something that we can also use that view for of, we don't know what the problem type is, so we call it other. Well, it can go in this view and then it can be reviewed until somebody goes, yeah, this is about authentication or this is about X, Y, or Z. But yeah, the views are exclusive from the forms unless we say otherwise.
Because what I was thinking is initially maybe we can just create the forms and we ask for the specific for each site, and then depending on what it has on the form, you will go to the view that has the knowledge area. I mean, I know it would be some work, but it will, or as you were mentioning, it will not be that much, and it will be an easy way at least to approach it initially, I believe.
Yeah, and I think part of doing this is the ability to simplify our forms a bit, not have to have one for sauce, one for sauce account, one for self-managed, one for other. I really dislike the other view. That's probably going to die when email support dies. But part of being able to simplify these views is the customer will have a better experience, because we won't have to have that awkward conversation of, you selected the wrong form, so we've moved you over, but now we don't have any of the information we need to troubleshoot. So here's all the stuff we need. So I think that's something that we can get beneficial out of this. A beneficial result that can come out of this is we can simplify these forms to be way more specific, and also they're pretty customizable. So if, you know, we were doing authentication tickets and Cynthia's like, look, every time we have to ask for this, okay, well, we can go edit the form to say, well, we're going to start asking for this. I think that's an ability we can kind of get to. Whereas right now, because the forms are vague, this is sauce. It's like, it's a sauce issue that it's vague. So we have to keep it vague on what we ask for, because we can't get specific for this particular thing needs this. We could get to it, but we never really have. So I think that's something we can also kind of do with this to make it so that the first reply the customer gets isn't, we need these logs, we need this, we need this, we need this. It can just be, hey, so this seems to be the problem. Can you try this? Lyle's typing something.
I'm typing all over the place.
I know.
It kind of duplicates a point that I had before, but I think it would be worth stepping back out a little bit and figure out what's the scope of what we want to accomplish in this work group, or put another way, like, what are our exit criteria? How do we know when we don't have to talk to each other anymore? I know what you're gonna link to, but I think that we could do, like,
I'm also being a smart aleck, because yes, they're there, but they're just as vague as the objectives at the top of this doc. Yeah, I do think we could kind of get the exit criteria a bit better. I think setting up the areas of focus sounds like it will accomplish the coalescing as well. So it sounds like our biggest thing is to set up the first iteration of areas of focus. It sounds like that's our exit criteria for the work group, is to get first iteration open and perhaps have an issue of, this is the next step, which is surfacing more areas, getting it a little more granular and building upon this, so that we get to a point where tickets are, you know, very specific and we can get them solved quicker.
To get to the first iteration of areas of focus, what do we need to do? Probably identify problems, identify what
the first thing is to determine what the areas are. That's going to be the biggest challenge, especially since that's basically saying, hey, so let's make categories for every kind of issue that we have. Obviously, one category is going to be the ever so fun other, and that'll be the, like Tom was saying, the things that don't quite fit until we can get them to fit.
So the question of how we get there, I put, like, up, we should be in numbers, bullet point like 10. The thing I'm highlighting right now is, I think there's two ways we can think through it. We could go through, like, what are things that are clearly in one place or another? That is, like, figure out the exceptions, things that don't have overlap. Or I made a little table at the bottom where we just go through different kind of problems. If we see them in SATs, see them in SM, then take a look at those and see from the problems go to the areas of focus. I don't have a strong opinion about which direction they go, but I think those are probably the two directions. Coming from problem or coming top down, kind of like what features the product. I think you're trying to talk, Jason, but you're muted.
Yes, it was. I think coming from the problem side where it might be too specific and then figuring out how to categorize those might be the easiest way. That's kind of like what I did with like what I'm doing with like the Zendesk mapping is I put everything that was there on the doc and then I said, okay, so I think that might be the easiest way to do it. I see Cynthia's putting the problem types. I recognize that terribly built table and I'm sorry, Cynthia. I can get that stuff out of Zendesk and make that look nicer later if we need to.
Question that's probably way beyond scope and for a much, much later iteration. But would there be merit in us aiming eventually to align with product stages?
Oh man.
Oh,
I'll
we
let Myra
have
explain
this.
this one.
we have it already. It's in the ticket form.
It's just never used.
It's very from the customer side. Like, I think we're all making that face because it would be beautiful if we could do it. But from the customer side, like, we get confused, and we're experts in GitLab. Like, what's the difference between verify CI and verify CD when I have a problem with my pipelines?
I definitely want to obfuscate that from the customer. I don't want them to have to care, but I do wonder if, yeah.
Also,
No,
I'll hold that thought and work with it.
I think it is really important, especially as we like get towards creating issues from customer problems, like making sure we're tagging the right PMs. So absolutely important, but we want to keep it away from the customer.
Yeah, totally agree with that. They shouldn't have to care. Same as they shouldn't have to care whether they're working with people who are self-managed focused or SaaS focused or licensing or renewal. We're one team, we're the support team. So I'm really firm on that one.
I think the absolute worst actually is that if it's about projects, it goes to project management. If it's about groups, it goes to manage access. It's a different group, even if it's the same problem at the root. Anyways, I think that in order to capture that information in a separate issue, we might want to consider whether that should be required for solving, right? So if support engineer is trying to solve the ticket, then they need to specify which product stage or group it's related to, and it might be related to more than one, but they need to, when solving it out, mark it. But I think that definitely kind of out of scope of our working group.
On like the Zendesk side, I actually think we should automate setting the product stage to prevent problems. And I think as we get more granular on the areas of focus, we can set up triggers that say, if it's this, set the product type to this. That way we don't have this ambiguous of like, oh, but this seems to fit 5 different criteria. We can go at the higher level and say, we've decided authorization tickets go to this product group. And, there will always be edge cases of like, right, but this is actually this group, even though it's a ticket about this. It's like, great, we want the edge cases. We want them documented so we can figure out how to kind of tackle those. But I do think that's like further down the line. Because I can tell you, even using GitLab as long as I have, I don't know the product stages well enough to put tickets in them. Like the second I get one that's about like, I'm setting up Omnibus, I don't know where to put that ticket anymore. I don't even know where it goes.
We also just recently changed our groups, so and renamed some of them, which makes it harder. I think that's why even in the ticket right now, it's only by stage and not by group.
There's a theoretical future where there is a YAML file that we've requested that contains every group and the stage that it's in, and then we can automate in Zendesk updating tags or whatever we need to for it. But I do think that's going to be like a future endeavor after we get things nice and organized into categories as we currently have them. So it sounds like what we kind of agree we should do is tackle figuring out the problems so we can start categorizing them. Does that sound like kind of what our agreement is?
Sounds like a good piece of homework.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say, I'm still not sure whether we have fully figured out the scope.
Nope. We got one thing.
Yeah, I think we got one thing, which is okay. Figure out the areas of focus themselves. Figure out what the areas are.
Yeah, I think part of it is the people just guessing as to whether or not coalescing is hard or easy, emotional, not emotional. And I think this gets us to a point where we get to say there's more commonality than not common, if that makes sense, right? And then with that, we can start opening it up as well and saying, listen, it doesn't matter if it's self-managed or SaaS. The customers have these problems that fit into these categories. And until we get clear on what those categories are, we won't be clear as to whether or not we can be successful coalescing, right? And all of the pieces that go along with the coalescing that say, yeah, our suspicions are correct. It's a lot more common than we think.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Have there not been a couple of iterations on this already? I think with the initial start on areas of focus, like trying to categorize problem types.
Attempts.
So
there's been attempts,
but
they've
we
never.
Restart or? Okay.
I'll pull some of the past issues and see if there's anything we can salvage from them. But a lot of them were like they got halfway through and they're like, "This is impossible," and I don't have the bandwidth.
Okay.
So I'll see what I can salvage from the past attempts, because I myself made this attempt 2 years ago and was like, I don't have the bandwidth to do this.
Well, I mean, some things that might be helpful is some of the skills matrix. There was a mind map. I'll try and find it that Tom Atkins put together that I actually thought was really good and could be helpful. So
also in the objective itself, where Jason wrote areas of focus, I linked that to the current issue that Tom A had open that kind of outlines a bunch of things, including the different problem types and whenever he pulled the table, a list of how often those problem types are being used. So I think all of having everyone in the group review that as well would probably be helpful, just to kind of have a better understanding of his idea of how areas of focus was, like what his vision was when he was talking about implementing areas of focus. Whether we stick to it or not.
It's a starting point. A lot of work's been done to get to that point already. So
other than that table that shows 5,000 something empty values, which makes me sad every time. But yeah, I think kind of using the problem types that we have might be a good starting point, just because it's every ticket should, in theory, have one of those values in place already. And I say in theory because 5,000 empty values tells me it doesn't always happen. And honestly, I should probably dig into how are those empty, because I'm pretty sure the form requires you to put something to submit it, which
only when you solve it. If you set it to pending and it auto closes, it doesn't.
No, I mean the customer to submit the form. I'm pretty sure the problem type's a required field.
Yes, but if they submitted it as other or the wrong form and we change it to .com.
Yeah, so we might also need to change up our forms a bit to safety net the support team to make sure we're filling out ticket metadata thoroughly.
Actually, Jason, as an action item, can I ask you to pull new numbers for those for problem types? Because I know that Tom A pulled this out a while ago. And I know we haven't had them for very long, but I would be interested to see what the SAS problems types say now that we're using the newer ones.
And there's also the account ones, so we can pull those as well into this. Because I've at least my attempt has been to make it where anyone can work the SAS account tickets. So yeah, I'll as an action item, I'll make sure to pull new metrics for the problem types for self-managed SAS and SAS account.
Is that a potential outcome that we want to document? Like a result of this work group would be that we have less than some percent of tickets without a problem type.
I mean, it could be a criteria, but I think part of that's also going to be the email support thing bypasses that instantly. Although that may not be a problem for too much longer. Yeah, I think we can make that one of our.
I mean, depending on how we structure our workflow, like we use the triage workflow, and tickets are hidden from experts until there's a problem type set. Then people will set the problem types because they want those tickets to go to experts.
On that note, can someone just, I'm missing something here. Can someone paint for me at the end of this, what does a day in the life of a support engineer look like? Like when they come into Zendesk, and I'm just thinking about the impact on SLAs as well. Can someone just help me understand what that will look like once we've implemented this?
Yeah, so based on what me and Tom had talked about a while back, the vision is we'll have kind of the standard, like this is your needs organ triage, but this is whatever standard views that everybody would have access to. We would then have group-based views for experts in various regions, authentication, geo, HA, and they would have a view that just pulls those tickets based on the areas of focus that they can work on and kind of get nailed out, knocked out a little quicker because they have that experience, they have that knowledge. We also envision this being a great way to train somebody who's like, I want to get better at Kubernetes. Great, we're going to put you in the Kubernetes areas of focus, and then you'll see all those tickets. Somebody saying, oh, I'm doing this module. You should probably join that areas of focus group then. That way you can see those tickets. So I think this is kind of like a supplemental thing that experts in the various regions would use to assign tickets to themselves, and then they would go back to working from their my assigned view. In theory, what we would see is that we have all tickets going into some category, some area of focus. I think Tom had said we should have everybody be in 2 focuses. That way they're not limiting their pool of tickets and they also are helping out. So we would basically kind of start getting rid of some of the views that maybe don't make sense when you have a little more granularity there.
I mean, I would still imagine for each engineer to still have like the kind of general needs assignee from your region or all region tickets. This would kind of be for like, hey, here are just all the tickets that are unassigned currently, you know, if you want to pick one up or whatever it is. I can still see us having like just a single view for all tickets that have an SLA and sorting it by what's going to breach next. And that'll be for crew, right? Like, so especially as we move towards the crew model, whoever's crew that day, they're helping to keep track of, you know, that tickets aren't breaching. If it's assigned, go ping that person. If it's not assigned, you know, consider taking it on, kind of thing, right? Like, so I don't see an SLA view completely going away, but I would probably like, my vision of this, at least in how it looks in Zendesk, would be that we'd have a single one, so that whether it's Hawk or crew, you would kind of have this one view, and then again, you would have the needs assignee view to help pick up new tickets and care a little less about the topic per se, but might kind of fit into Lyle's like 10% of it's a topic I like don't really know about, but I'm willing to just kind of take it on and run with it. And then, but most of the tickets, right, especially if you're not working crew or whatever, you would be kind of looking at those areas that you're focused on. Either you're an expert in or that you're trying to learn more about it.
Thank you, that helps.
Great explanation there, Cynthia. Thank you. Yeah, I do like the idea of we have one single, this is our tickets with SLA view. It has all the tickets. They're not separated because this is SaaS and this is self-managed. We don't have to worry about, oh, well, the FRT or the NRT of SaaS is going down. It's like, nope, that's the NRT of support is going down. We can stop separating these out and then be like, because honestly, when I look at those, it feels almost like a blame game of, well, our SRTs, our NRTs going down and SaaS is the one who's lower. So it's their fault. It's like, no, it's our fault as a support org. We're not helping them enough. That's kind of where we should honestly be, in my opinion, is support's NRT is this. We already take the NRT of all of our little separations and say, this is our NRT. Right, we should stop separating them out though. We should say, this is an NRT. We need to focus as a team on improving this. The dog looks like he has something to say.
I was just going to add to that there's going to be a need to separate reporting by customer segment when we start reporting, those things. So that we can't lose sight of that. I appreciate yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it as a blame game. I think it's trying to identify the root cause. So we go identify whatever workflow, but it is one team. We're all in this together. That's kind of the genesis of the crew, right? Is to get it even more focused on a one team approach to everything, right? Or at least the ticket initially. So, but as we go through all this, there's still going to be this sales segmentation of, are we dealing with our SaaS paid customers? Or are we dealing with our self-managed paid customers? And we want to be able to represent that to some extent, but also let them know that everybody's working on everything, basically. So.
Yeah, and talked with Ilya in depth about how we're doing our metrics. None of them are based on views. None of them are based on forms. We're using things that are important, like this is a gold customer. Their sales segmentation is this. We're using actual data from Salesforce for our reporting. We're using the data that we have synced from Salesforce and Zendesk for our reporting. So luckily, no matter how we coalesce it, unless we seriously screw up SLAs, we'll still be good for being able to separate out. This is the large, this is the medium, this is the SMB, these are gold, these are silver, this is SaaS, this is self-managed. So we'll still have that ability to do for metrics to have that degree of separation. We just won't have to actually look at, it won't actually be something we're looking at when we work a ticket. It's not, this is this is SaaS, this is self-managed, this is a support ticket.
Okay, I realize we're at time. And I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to ask Jason, what do you think we're at where we need to be right now, aside from the action or tasks to be done listed in that section? You or anyone else, is there anything that we're missing here that we kind of want to do? Also, if we're going to start determining areas of focus and problem types, do we want to do that async in front ahead of the next meeting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say what we've got for a task list right now, we've got a WoW LinkedIn issue where we're already kind of talking about the barriers for coalescing. So that's good. I'll review that and kind of work out of that. But I do think good homework for all of us is to start trying to determine those areas of focus. I think focusing on the problem types is good as a starting point of these are the problem types. Let's see if we can find things that don't fit into these. Maybe try to expand that other field to not be every other ticket. I'm going to get those metrics kind of pulled over. Somebody just added to read the areas of focus issue that Tom A made way back when. Definitely agree. It's got a lot of information. Tom put a lot of heart into it. But I think that's a good task list for us to have for the next time. But I would definitely say, yeah, we're going to do this async. That way we're not limiting ourselves to when we can work on this. It's, yeah, so everybody kind of work on trying to figure out the areas of focus. And the next meeting, we'll kind of look at what everybody has and see if we can't combine things or separate things out more if needed. I think once we got everything kind of categorized, we can figure out how to take these categories and then start figuring out what implementation or all that would look like. The dog looks like he has something to say again.
Thing about the problem types. Jason, can I get you, when you have a moment, to pull the list of problem types for SaaS and SaaS account, but also including the ones that you're adding
the ones we
soon?
plan to add, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I was already going to kind of throw those on there of like, I'm adding these by the end of the month. They're very important, and it's a contentious issue that keeps getting brought up of where do people talk to us about their CI minutes? Because that was a hard question to answer until I was like, we make a new field. That's what we do. Did Lyle raise his hand? Do we just send all those people to talk to Lyle?
Now I say nowhere. Just give them the CI minutes. You submit a ticket, you just get CI minutes.
Is that how that works now? Cool, but yeah, I'll get all the areas for self-managed SaaS and SaaS account and the ones that are coming that I'm gonna be adding in the near future, and I'll put all of those under the problem types. I'll do that before I leave for the day today, and then we can kind of start working from there. Cool. Anybody else? Questions, comments, last minute thoughts?
You're gonna take the recording, upload to YouTube unfiltered.
Does it go to YouTube unfiltered? Then yes, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm definitely not gonna put it in a Google Drive and just link to that like I originally planned.
You can make a playlist in the unfiltered account so you can keep them all in one.
Man, sounds like I need to sync with Cynthia on how to use YouTube better.
I can also show you. I did it for the metrics analysis work group.
Cool. So I will get it uploaded to YouTube, but tomorrow I will sync with Lyle and or Cynthia to show me how to YouTube like an adult. And not just click random videos all day. Awesome.
Oh, thanks, Jason.
Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Yep,
Thank
great
you.
meeting. I will see all y'all at least in 2 weeks, but I'm sure I'll see you in Slack well before that.
Cheers.
Cheers. See ya.
Bye all.
Bye.